Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and we are joined by Julia Parenteau from Texas Realtors, and this is actually, I believe, your second appearance on our program, isn't it?
I believe so.
Well,
Yeah. It's been a
welcome.
while.
Yes, it's
Happy to be
definitely
back.
been a while, at least 2 years, right?
Yeah, probably.
So, welcome back. For anybody who didn't see you the first time you were on our program, if you don't mind just giving us a quick introduction, who you are and what you do for Texas Realtors.
Sure. I am Texas Realtors Director of Public Policy, which means a whole lot of things. And it primarily at this time of year means that I'm focused on the Texas legislature and working with all of our elected officials and their staff who are here in Austin, or were here in Austin up until Memorial Day, but it sounds like they're coming back soon, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I am one of the primary lobbyists on staff here for the association, and as an aside, I also work with the rest of our team to cover local issues mobilization. So
Very good.
that's the basics about me.
Well, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to be on. I know that it's still a busy time for you guys, so we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But I've heard people describe this legislative session as the weirdest session ever. Can you tell us, just fill us in, what was your day-to-day like this session, and how was it different from other years?
Sure. Well, day to day, it changed a lot from the start of session to the end of session. So in January, when the legislature convened, obviously the world of COVID-19 was a lot different than it is today. Vaccinations were not at the level anywhere close to where they are today. And the legislature really wasn't sure how they were going to operate. And so for the most part, it was difficult for members of the public, which we are, to be in the building and be walking around talking to people like we ordinarily would have. As they spent a little bit more time together, they came up with some House and Senate rules about how they were going to, operate their committee rooms and the galleries where we all like to go on Realtor Day and watch the proceedings. And ultimately, what they wound up doing in the Senate, you could not be in their gallery or in their committee rooms unless you had demonstrated that you had a negative COVID test, got a wristband. I kept my souvenirs. These are my last week worth of wristbands, not even the whole session.
Wow.
And in the House, they didn't quite have those stringent rules, but for legislators on both the House and the Senate side, legislators were able to determine for their own offices whether they were going to be free and open to the public, whether they were going to be by appointment only, or whether they were going to be completely closed down and just take electronic communication. So in a normal year, starting in January, Texas Realtors lobby team would be there all day, every day, walking around, visiting with people, talking about our legislative priorities, sort of laying the groundwork for what was to come in the rest of session. And this time we couldn't do that because most of the offices, especially at the beginning, were closed entirely. So the other thing that made it, I think, the weirdest session ever was as a result of all of those offices being closed down and people not really being sure how to interact with one another. The new legislators, all the new staff, even the returning ones who have known each other for a long time, did not have the opportunity to spend time together. And that's one of the things that's always made the Texas legislature great and different than some of the other politics scenes we read about so much. The legislators are actually very close, and their staff work together, and they are able to, even if they disagree, build a camaraderie. In this session, a lot of that was taken away, and so people were really struggling to figure out how to talk to each other like normal human beings. Got better towards the end of session. And eventually after the winter storm, especially, the Band-Aid kind of got ripped off, and we were having committee meetings and hearings and all that stuff and working on legislation. But Some of those offices remain closed down until the end of session. And I look this way because I can see the Capitol Dome out my window, so it's in my head. And the Senate kept their COVID testing rules up all the way till the end of session, and so there were National Guard tents outside the building all the way until the last day. So it was a strange environment that did not always make for the best day-to-day working relationships, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a lot more to consider, and I'm just thinking to myself how many COVID tests you probably had to have during that time. I can count on one hand how many I had to this day.
Every day.
And
every day.
Every day. I mean, that's just, wow. That's a lot to consider, but because of the work you're doing, it's so important that you were able to get in there and speak on these different issues that we're going to be discussing today. Just generally, we're going to dive in a little bit more on some of these, but just generally, what were some of the biggest realtor wins this legislative session?
Well, as it turned out, there were a lot. We really weren't sure how it was going to go. Again, sitting in January, thinking that the legislature was really only going to be able to focus probably on healthcare and pandemic response. We certainly expected there would be some civil liability discussions. But as far as like just regular real estate related issues, we kind of didn't think. We were worried that might not happen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when the winter storm happened and the focus became all about energy, which is, of course, important to realtors and their clients, but the technical aspects of so many of those bills are not things that we have expertise to chime in on. Our position was basically like, if we want the flip the switch in the faucets and have the lights and the water come on, make that happen, legislature, and you're doing a great job. But we were, by the end, able to see a whole bunch of bills that really are going to be great for both our realtor members and their clients around the state. So we had some notable eminent domain reform, which is something that the legislature's been working on for 6-8 years, depending on who you ask. So that was really fantastic to see. We saw some cleanup from Senate Bill 2, the property tax reform legislation from last year, that's going to give even better notices and information out to the property taxpayers. We had a flood disclosure for tenants bill, which I know is something that especially HAR members have talked about quite a bit. Broadband. The legislature passed the big broadband package that will put additional focus and funding on making sure we have good broadband infrastructure out into as many of our communities all across the state as possible. We had Senate Bill 30 that related to discriminatory covenants in deeds that passed unanimously with sign-on, I think, from nearly every member of the legislature. And we saw some other great things that dealt with pandemic response and how real estate can continue to function regardless of, what other emergency orders might be happening out there. So It was a lot. And then, of course, homeowners association reform, which I think we can dig into a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is a lot of, how many bills were you monitoring this session?
I think we were tracking around 2,600 this session. Which, the legislature started slow. And so the filings of bills were actually a lot lower than normal up until about the last week. And then they just tore it right off. So they, I think, ultimately filed somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 bills. And so we were tracking about 25 to 30% of them.
Wow. That is amazing. Let's get into some specifics. What has changed with the new requirement for flood disclosures for tenants? As you mentioned, that's very, very important to people in the Houston area and especially realtors in the Houston area.
Sure. Well, let me say first, of course, landlords are always able to do voluntary disclosures as they want, but the bill is effective January 1st of 2022 is when the disclosures are going to be required to be made. So the bill, and again, this is something that we've been working on actually with Houston, Harris County area legislators for several years. This year, it wound up largely mimicking language that our members are going to be familiar with in the seller disclosure. And so, and that has been, kind of one of the points that we've been working through with those legislators for a couple of years is why the seller's disclosure language is written the way it is, which says that the seller is aware or unaware of those conditions on the property. And we wanted to make sure that we were keeping that same standard for this landlord disclosure of flooding. So it focuses primarily on 100-year floodplains. And it really is asking two questions: whether the landlord is aware or unaware that the property is located within a 100-year floodplain. And it also has boilerplate language in there that says even if the landlord says they are not aware, that the tenant should probably assume that it is in a 100-year floodplain, and points to some resources where they can look. It does provide an exception if the property has been raised above that level, which many of the properties your folks are working with probably have been. And then the next question it asks is whether the landlord is aware or unaware if the property has been damaged, and this can be even a portion of the property has been damaged by flooding at least once in the last 5 years. So that notice, there is not actually any language in Texas law that describes specifically what has to go into a lease. So, folks are able to kind of write those leases however they want. So what this says is it has to be in a form that's substantially similar to what the law says, and basically what I just read off. And it is a disclosure that has to be given in a separate document to the tenant, either at or before the lease execution. And that's one place where I want to call out the bill's author. Houston area legislator Armando Wally was the author in the House, and Senator Joan Huffman was the sponsor in the Senate. And as originally drafted, that bill had said that it had to be given before the lease only. That was the only option. And we talked with a lot of our property managers and a lot of HAR members, in fact, to check on how that language would work out. And they really hoped that the author would be willing to consider giving that document at the lease execution, and ultimately he did. And so we were really grateful for that change.
Very good. So repeat to us when that goes into effect.
January 1st, 2022.
Okay.
So,
and I would imagine there's going to be some TR forms that we can be looking for.
Yes,
as we approach that date.
Yeah, and let me take that opportunity to make a quick plug. Our legal department will, and does every session, they'll be doing a webinar that kind of digs into the actual legal side of all of these bills that passed, and that is coming up in late July. And they will also, I'm sure, be getting their forms groups together to work
very good.
on.
Please share that information with us, and we'll share it with our members as well. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into a different topic here. You mentioned broadband. So what was the goal and what was the outcome of the broadband access reform?
So coming into the session where we were in the pandemic, broadband access, and the absolute necessity it had become for pretty much all of our lives was top of mind for a lot of legislators. And this is something that realtors, both here in Texas, but also at the national level, have been talking about for years. This is not a new thing for us. It just really got the bright ring light shone on it in the pandemic.
Pun intended.
And there's a couple of ways that the legislature kind of looked at broadband access. It's money, state actual funding for broadband infrastructure and access. It is the development of the infrastructure by private and utility companies. And it was rural and also urban. So we talk a lot about broadband access in the lens of rural communities that don't actually have the infrastructure, but there are connectivity issues in our urban areas as well, and some of those might be affordability and hardware, but they're problems nonetheless, because of course broadband access is at this point of our lives critical to work. Here we are, school, telehealth, all sorts of other things. So it's really the legislature has finally prioritized making sure that as many Texans as possible are going to be able to have access to broadband infrastructure. So a whole bunch of bills got filed. Like I said, it was a priority, so I think everyone felt confident that the legislature would pass something. But what that finally looked like was always up for debate up until it finally did. So House Bill 5 was the big package that passed related to broadband access, and that was by House Member Trent Ashby and then Senator Robert Nichols. And what that does is a couple of things. It expands the governor already had sort of a broadband task force, and it puts some additional focus on that task force. But it also creates another office of broadband infrastructure that is going to be a state level department that is going to focus on making sure that broadband is, and the infrastructure especially is being put out into the communities that need it. And so it's really gratifying to see that, because once you have a state level department, that means there's going to be funding and attention and all sorts of other good resources that come with that. So that is it's a long bill, but that's the bottom line of what it does.
Very good. And as you mentioned, so important for realtors, because people are not going to want to buy a home if there's no internet access. It's a need, it's a necessity, as you mentioned. So very good. Thank you for that. Another topic here, there was a bill presented whose goal was to make it easier to remove discriminatory language from deeds. What was the outcome for that bill?
Well, so Senate Bill 30 is the bill that ultimately passed related to discriminatory deed restrictions. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out another one of our Houston area legislators, Jean Wu, who had filed this legislation in previous sessions, and it just hadn't gotten the attention it needed. So this year, the subject of discriminatory covenants in deeds became a national conversation, especially after incidents with the George Floyd killing and the conversations that really sparked all around the country after that. And that was one of the housing related pieces of conversation that came out. So a bunch of other states also were looking at ways to address these old clauses in deeds that are no longer constitutional and haven't been. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled them unconstitutional some years ago. Unconstitutional and not enforceable, but they're still there. And that came as a rude surprise to a lot of people as they were buying property. When they saw that language in there, it could be really shocking. And so what the Texas legislature looked at this year was a process to make removing that language a little bit easier. There already was a way to do it, but it's not accessible really to folks. Essentially how it looked is that you'd have to sue your county property records, and they would have to be the defendant and go to court, and it was a whole thing, and
very complicated.
And expensive. And so the legislature was hoping to make it a little bit more of an administrative procedure while still respecting the fact that the language contained in a deed is supposed to be a complete history of that property. And they also wanted to make sure that it was left to the discretion of the property owner to decide whether or not they wanted to remove that language. There were some proposals that would have allowed the property records of the county to just blanket wipe all of those out. And given the history that is contained in deed documents, the legislature decided it was appropriate to leave it to the discretion of the property owner. But we were really happy to see that passed. On a kind of I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to use the word unprecedented at this stage of the game in 2021, but it was unusual to see a bill get filed that the entire Senate signed on to as joint authors, and many House members did as well. And I will note that the House made one change to the bill as it came to the floor. It was a Senate bill, so it goes through the Senate first and then makes its way through the House committees. the House made one change, and that was to rename the bill the Senator Royce West Act. So Senator West was the primary author of the bill, and they wanted to name it in his honor. So that was what they did, and it was done. So even the Speaker of the House voted in favor of it. And as our members who are familiar with chairing committees will remember, usually the chair has the right to vote, but often they don't exercise it. And so when you see the Speaker of the House take a vote, that means that they're really invested in that legislation. So that was great.
Excellent. Very good. So I do see one question that came in. If you have any questions for Julia, please go ahead and type them in now. I still have a few more things for her too, but please type them in now and we'll get to as many of those as we can. We had a question come in from Robert. He asked, can you elaborate on any of the marijuana bills? Any of them have a reflection on grow houses or farms?
Okay, so the marijuana legislation that the legislature was looking at this session was primarily focused on, so there was medical marijuana, and that did pass, but the other bills that were contemplated were largely around criminal justice reform. And they had less to do with property. And so I think that as legalization of marijuana continues to expand here in Texas, that's when we're going to start to have more conversations about what the property implications are. Thankfully, we have some great lessons from our partners in states like Colorado and Washington who have been dealing with that for years. But this year, the legislation that the Texas legislature was working on didn't have quite as much to do with that side of the deal.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for that. So let's keep moving here. HOA. Again, this is from what I see on social media. This was a widely popular reform. And so what was, again, the goal here and where does this stand today?
Sure. So, as of Friday, it's done. The governor signed the bill, signed it and filed it on Friday. So it is not in effect immediately, and we can talk about the effective dates in just a minute. But the goal of HOA reform for this legislative session was to answer some of the concerns. I can't get close to claiming it answers all of the concerns that we have been hearing from our members about working with property owners associations, whether it's what you hear about from your clients as they are just living in these communities, or about the trials and tribulations that you might have when trying to do a transaction in one of these communities. So Texas Realtors worked with legislators both in the House and the Senate this session to file bills that would address some of the top concerns that we heard about. And the bills as filed dealt with a little bit with fees, but really only the resale certificate fee, which was one we heard about a lot, but again, not the only fee. I'll come back to that. And it also had to do with essentially dispute resolution for if you are a property owner living in a managed community. There was not a whole lot written down in law about what your rights were if you have a dispute, whether that's on a fine or a fee that had been assessed, or on, say, an architectural review committee authority. Another thing we heard a lot about is how difficult it can be to find contact information for HOAs, whether it's for the board, the entity themselves, or the management company. So the bill also expanded the filed management certificate, which under current law is required to be filed along with dedicatory instruments at the county property records. And so the management certificate that's filed now will also have to include a phone number, an email address, and a website address. And that is shocking to a lot of people that, at this point in life, that was not something that was required to be anywhere, but it wasn't. It will be now. And I mentioned the website because the legislation also requires homeowners associations, specific types of property owners associations, to maintain a website that includes their governance documents and is a space for them to post meeting agendas and minutes and things like that that are relevant to the folks who live in the communities and are trying to engage with the board in their governance. So that website can also be hosted if the property owners association has a management company. The management company can do it on their behalf. And it, without a management company, that law currently will only apply to property owners associations that have more than that have 60 units or more, 60 lots or more. And I should say that condo associations are actually governed almost entirely under a different section of law. So the vast majority of this legislation is going to apply to non-condo property owners associations. Not all of it. There's a couple of things that do apply to condos, but the vast majority of it was focused on non-condo property owners associations. The condo side is something that we're going to keep talking about for future legislators sessions. Excuse me. So let me stop there because that's a lot. There's more to this bill. So do you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, so we did share the myhoastory.com in the comments. Can you tell us a little bit about that site?
Sure. So as the session was going on and these bills that we were working on with Chairman Chris Turner in the House and Chairman Brian Hughes in the Senate, it became apparent that we had some pretty significant opposition from HOA management companies. And that's to be expected. First and foremost, the bill was capping one of the fees that they charge. Also, there's a business model to be built out of a lack of specificity in law. So the HOA management companies were making a lot of noise in the legislature, and we started to get questions about the hundreds, or in some cases thousands, of emails that individual legislators were getting into their offices from calls for action that the management companies had put out. And we knew that in fact Texas was on our side when it comes to HOA reform, but we wanted to make sure we had documentation to show the legislators that they had support from real Texans out there. And so my HOA story became part of our grassroots campaign as the legislature was working on this bill. We also did a statewide poll that asked questions about the provisions of the bill that showed fantastic support across the state for everything that the bill was working on. But myhoastory.com was a space for people to just talk about what their experiences have been in property owners associations. And it was really incredible to see the response. I think before the session ended and that site was live for not quite, 2 months, we took in somewhere close to 400 stories from, and some of them were from realtors, a lot of them were just from regular property owners who got hold of the site and wanted some space to be able to tell their story. And so that site is still live. All those stories are still compiled there. They weren't all negative. If you sift through, you'll be able to see some of the ones where people really were very positive about their HOA, and we didn't filter those out. We wanted to make sure that there was a full and accurate picture of the stories we were getting. But it's still able to take comment, and we have been talking up and down about how, as great as this legislation was and as excited as we are to see it passed and have the governor sign it, there's more to be done on HOAs. And so we do intend to bring more legislation for their consideration the next time they come together in 2023. And myhoastory.com is one of the places where we'll continue to collect information about what they should be working on.
Very good. And that story really just demonstrates how powerful those calls to action are. As you were saying, they were getting a lot of emails from the HOA companies or organizations, and so then they're questioning you. Well, I thought that this was cut and dry, but no, there's opposition. So it opened up the conversation even more, but those calls to action really are important. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't yet, visit that myhoastory.com. Realtors, you guys know all of the the crazy stories that can take place. But again, you can also share that with your clients and customers. So as far as HOA, anything else that we need to know as far as upcoming dates or anything like that?
Yeah, well, let me say a couple more things. So the
Sure.
management certificate that I mentioned, that's now going to have a phone number and a web address and an email in it. That management certificate is now not just going to be filed with our county property records, but it's also going to be filed with the Real Estate Commission. And so the Real Estate Commission in the bill is tasked with building a publicly accessible and searchable database of all of those management certificates all around the state. This doesn't solve all of your documentation problems, but it does start giving us a single source database of property owners associations around the state. One of the fascinating things we found was that no one actually really knows how many HOAs are out there, because there's no centralized recording of them. There's no oversight. There's nothing. And I'll be perfectly honest, this bill does not provide any regulatory oversight at the state level of HOAs. It didn't do that. All TREC is going to be able to do is create this database. But we're hopeful that having that information there will be helpful. And it's going to include one other thing that I didn't mention. It's going to include any fees related to the transaction that the HOA charges are now going to have to be included in that management certificate. Obviously, that's not going to be specific to a property you might be working on. If it's a percentage fee, they may have a flat fee for certain things. They may have a percentage fee for something, but you'll be able to get a picture for what is going to come up with the property that you're working on. The House added a whole bunch of things to this legislation at the end when they had their floor debate on it. As I mentioned, the legislature, we weren't quite sure how their bandwidth was going to be. But as it turns out, there were a lot of legislators, especially on the House side, that were very interested in HOA reform, and a lot of other bills got filed in addition to the Chris Turner and Brian Hughes bills that we were working on. And some of them were really good ideas. And so the House heard a lot of those bills in their committee, in their business and industry committee, but ultimately, you can't pass everything when there's 9,000 bills that get filed, and most of those bills had not progressed forward. And so when the Senate bill came to the House floor, the House actually wound up adding a lot of those ideas into what ultimately passed Senate Bill 1588. And I believe there were 7 total amendments on that bill on the second reading. And, pretty much they were all really good ideas, things that we think are going to be helpful for property owners. They include things like if a property owners association doesn't file the document that allows them to charge assessments, that'll be in their dedicatory instruments, and this is one of those things that does apply both to regular property owners associations and condos. If they don't properly file that document, which is current law, they're supposed to be doing it, they can't charge assessments. And that's going to be a really scary thing for a lot of HOAs, and we expect that we're going to get a lot better compliance on that filing. One of the other amendments said that if a property owners association is going to be contracting for a project that is $50,000 or more, basically spending a lot of their association members' money, that they have to put out bids for it. Not that they even have to take the lowest bid or anything else related to that, just that they have to get some bids for the project. We heard some stories that were shocking about basically HOA boards, giving out millions of dollars in contracts to, a board member's sibling, or, horrible stories like that. And so that amendment was hoping to get at that. So there's a bunch of other things that wound up in that bill that we're really excited about. We were excited about the bills that the chairman had filed on both sides, and but it got even better at the end, and there's a lot in it, and we could spend all day talking about it. I will happily answer more specific questions, but you don't need. I'll stop there and not rattle off the entire 16 pages of what that bill wound up being.
We did have a couple questions that came in, though. I want to quickly address. Connie asked, are the management companies also required to have fees posted on their website?
So the short answer is no. The the way that the bill was drafted, the management certificate is something that is publicly filed and has to be filed whether or not you have professional management. It's called a management certificate, but it's not necessarily linked to a professional property management company. It's something the HOA has to file no matter what. And the way the language requiring the fee transparency wound up, it says that any fee charged by the property owners association related to the transaction. So there was a lot of debate even on the House and Senate floors about the management company fees. And at this time, the legislature has determined that those fees are proprietary, and it would not be appropriate for the legislature to demand that they be publicly disclosed and filed in that document. But there's some good news related to, especially in condos. There was a separate bill that was passed dealing with condo association documents and the accessibility that those types of property owner associations have to give to their association members. So that's Senate Bill 318 by John Huffman, and then Chris Turner in the House, and it was like 6 pages of new text that basically says that if you are an association member in a condo, that you have to have a lot more unfettered access to the association's financial documents and all sorts of things like that. And management company information will be included in that, I expect. And so we're going to see how that rolls out, and I would not be surprised if the legislature considers some type of similar language for other property owners associations in future legislation.
Okay, great. Sherry also asked, where can we find out if our HOA filed?
Okay, well, that brings me to effective dates. So right now, your property owners association is required to have that management certificate filed with your county property records. The new filing that includes the information that I mentioned earlier, I believe that portion of the bill goes into effect as of September 1st. So if you have an HOA that's existing and operating right now, if they refile their management certificate the way they're supposed to, it'll be after September 1st. The Real Estate Commission database will not be up and operational. The law does not require them to have that available until December 1st. And there's two phases of rollout for filing, getting that certificate up to the Real Estate Commission. If you are an existing property owners association as of, I believe it's going to be November 30th, because that part of the law goes into effect December 1st. So if you are existing, have filed already as of November 30th, you're actually going to have all the way until June of next year, June of 2022. To get that filing to the Real Estate Commission. Now, they will have to have it updated and accurate with the property records. They just don't have to necessarily get it to the Real Estate Commission until June of next year. But if you are a new property owners association that comes online after December 1st, you're going to have to make that filing with the Real Estate Commission within 7 days of filing it with your county. So it's a little complicated in its rollout. It basically is giving a bit of a grace period to existing homeowners associations to let them get all their records in order. But new ones, it'll be effective as of December 1st. So.
Okay. Kelly said, can you tell us more about the HOA Board and ACC committee?
Sure. So this legislation dealt quite a bit with architectural review committees and the authority that they can have over one's property. So as I mentioned earlier, the bill specified a little bit more concretely than had been there before what a property owner's rights might be if they have a dispute with the Architectural Review Authority. So this could mean probably two different things. Kelly, for your question, it might mean if there was a fee or a fine assessed, and it could mean if the ACC made a decision, like if you put in a request to say build a porch, and they denied it.
Mm-hmm.
Under current law, it's kind of the end of it for you, unless you really are mad about it and want to hire an attorney and comb through your dedicatory instruments and figure out why you should be allowed to build that porch. The law now will provide the opportunity for a property owner to have at least one hearing with the board, not
Mm-hmm.
the ACC, but to take that dispute with the ACC up to the board. And I should also mention that if there is a denial of a request like that, like building a porch, the ACC is now going to be required to tell you what, if anything, there may not be anything,
Mm-hmm.
what you could do to change your request that would meet their standards. So if you say wanted to build an 8-foot fence and their dedicatory instruments say only 6-foot fences, they can't just tell you no and
Mm-hmm.
send it back. They have to say no, but you can make it 6 feet. So they're going to have to give a little bit better information to folks so that people understand, why those kinds of requests might have been denied. And then you'll, as I mentioned, you'll be able to take, if you so choose, you can take that dispute to the board and be able to have one hearing. That's all the law will be requiring them to do, but at least it's one. And it allows, in the cases of fine or fee disputes, if you got a violation notice for something in your front yard or your grass being too long or whatever, the association is going to have to give you 10 days in advance a packet of information that basically lays out their argument for whatever action they took. So if they have photos of your grass being too long or photos of the playground in your front yard, they're going to have to give that to you 10 days in advance. And at the meeting, they will go first in laying out their case, and then the property owner basically gets an opportunity to respond and make their own case back.
Okay. Sounds like very practical things that we're going to be required.
Yeah, I will tell you, Christina, it was really interesting to us to hear some of the rhetoric that was being tossed out against this bill by the folks who were working in opposition to it, because it was really inflammatory, and in a lot of cases we believed it was misleading at best. And when we've had a chance to sit down and talk to, say, HOA board members who have heard that this bill is going to end the world when it comes to them being able to have functional communities, and explain what actually isn't contained in it, everyone's kind of fine with it, because it really is just bringing the balance back a little bit closer to the property owners associations and putting some responsibility and duty on HOAs, because they have so much power. I mean, they can foreclose on your home, up to they can do a lot of other things as well. But with that much power, not to quote superhero comics, but here we are. With that much power comes responsibility, and we wanted to make sure that there was something in state law that gave property owners a reasonable expectation of their rights, and here we are.
Very good. Well, that might be the first superhero quote we've had, but we have had some Trekkie quotes on this show before. So just a couple more quick questions. Let me get Sherry's first really quick. She said, are we allowed to share this post on our Facebook wall? Absolutely. We encourage you to share this with your clients and consumers, and of course other realtors as well. Two more quick questions from Connie and Kelly. How will the requirements be communicated to the HOAs?
Well, what Texas Realtors will, I expect. I am not our communications department, but I expect we'll be rolling out a great deal of information related to this. HOAs have their own associations. There are primarily the one that comes to mind is the Texas Community Associations Advocates, which is I believe largely funded by management companies, but they do the work of communicating to their HOA boards. We've already seen some of their member entities put out short videos or things like that, other written communication about what's contained in the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So they have their folks on the association side as well that will help communicate that. But we'll be sure we're going to continue to put together some holistic resources on that hopefully you'll be able to share with whoever you like.
Excellent. And one more question here from Kelly. I've heard that HOAs will be required to have a separate ACC committee. Members cannot be the same.
So no. Okay. They are not required to have a separate ACC committee by the law. Mm-hmm. However, it says that if they do have a separate ACC, that the members cannot be a current board member or a member of a current board member's household. So there are some requirements there that there is some separation, and the reason for that was trying to reduce conflicts of interest, and quite honestly, in the worst case scenarios where we were hearing about folks who basically just ruled both bodies, and you would never have the opportunity to get any due process as a property owner out of that. So that was the motivation for that. But the law does not require an HOA to have a separate committee. It just sets some standards if they do.
Very good. Gives opportunity for checks and balances. Gary asked, what are your expected results from the special session? Which I was also going to ask you about that. And also, how many special sessions do you believe that we will have?
My money is on at least 2. I'm hoping it's not 3. So it had been everyone's expectation that the legislature would come back for a special session in the fall. Generally, people are looking at October right now, and that is going to be focused on redistricting, obviously, since we didn't have our census numbers ready for the legislature to deal with redistricting during the regular session. So that has always been the plan since it became clear that data was not going to be available. The way that the legislature ended, it's been made pretty clear that the governor intends to call them back for another session, and it got even clearer on Friday when he vetoed Article 10 of the state appropriations package, which is the part of our budget that funds the legislature and their staff and a number of state agencies, the Sunset Commission and some others, most notably. So he vetoed that part of the budget, which means as of September 1st that there will not be any paychecks for any of the legislative staff or those agencies that are included in that article. So they will have to come back before then to address that. And it's my understanding that the governor intends to put a number of other items on the call, big issues that didn't pass during the regular, including the elections bill, bail reform, some other issues that they're talking about as well. I don't know yet. Only the governor can say what ultimately is on the call for a special session, and the legislature can only work on what he allows them to work on during a special. So it remains to be seen yet. I think that right now the expectation is that they will come back in late July and early August for that. But there's always a possibility that he calls them back sooner and then does another one even in the meantime. He can do what he wants. So so at least 2, maybe more.
Okay. Very good. Well, Julia, you've given us so much great information this morning. Manaz actually said, thank you for all of your hard work to get us to this point, and thank you for sharing this information. Is there anything else that you want Texas Realtors to know?
Let me talk just for a second about our process of getting to a legislative session, because I believe, I apologize to all my association leaders if I'm wrong about this, but I believe we are still having our committee application process open here at Texas Realtors. I think that goes through the end of June. Let me check on that to make sure I'm right. But even if it's not, HAR members have had the opportunity, and so many of you take it, and we appreciate that, to apply for and serve on Texas Realtors committees. Five of the committees that I work with relate to public policy, and we have our 4 issues committees: business issues, infrastructure, land use, and taxation, that are under the umbrella of our public policy oversight committee. And those committees are made up of volunteer members all around the state who come here to Austin to hear from expert speakers, to hear from legislators, to hear from us as staff, and also, of course, there's a lot of Zoom. But they really dig into all of these issues. They'll dig into issues that the legislature is going to be focusing on, and they'll bring their own ideas too about what is important to the realtor community around the state. And then they spend 8 months doing research and formulating positions, and then making recommendations to our oversight committee, and then all the way on up to our executive board. And that is what ultimately becomes our legislative priorities for each session. And it's not everything that we wind up working on, because you have to be reactionary in the legislative space, because they're going to file whatever they're going to file. But it gives us direction for what our members want Texas Realtors to proactively work on during each legislative session. So it's a lengthy and involved process, and we could not do it without the hundreds of volunteers that serve on those committees every year. So if you are interested in anything like that, please let me know. But also, even if you are not serving on one of our policy committees, I still need to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out to me or to any of the government affairs staff here, and let us know what you're seeing out in the world, and maybe if there's something great that's happening, or if there's something terrible that's happening that we can work on from a legislative angle. That's what we need to hear about from you.
Very good. And I do want to mention both our governmental and political affairs directors, Karen Driscoll and Amber Burton, have both been watching this morning. You can also reach out to them here locally for any local issues. They have a great working relationship with Texas Realtors and with Julia, so you can reach out to them too. And we will be looking for volunteers here in the next couple of months as well. We're going to be opening up our committee applications too, so be on the lookout for that. Well, again, Julia, thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate it, and you've given us a lot of great resources that we can pass along. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that is it for this Member Focus Monday. We hope you all have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.